What is your take on creatine and the studies that's shown about traumatic brain injury? Have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, some of the stuff I saw with Tony Ricci, so you might already be aware of it.
Yeah.
I think creatine. So what is a concussion? A concussion is a traumatic brain injury where your brain goes through this transient metabolic crisis. So and then it kind of like slows down because it's trying to preserve the energy. So how creatine works is it allows you, it kind of, it's like it's a fuel, right? So now your brain can use that as a fuel. I think if I remember correctly, it's helpful for like the first week of concussion, but like you have to do like 20 grams. So like essentially you're doing that loading phase as opposed to like when I take creatine, I'm probably doing like 5 grams,
Yeah.
But that said, you get a suspected concussion, like just, hopefully at this point you're not fighting anyway. So who cares if your weight goes up? Just start doing the loading.
So you just load for how many weeks would you do it?
I think it's a week. That's where it shows.
Yeah, I think it was a week.
So like concussions, there's 2 phases. That first phase is where you get symptoms. That lasts for about a week or so. I mean, some people it'll linger. And then that second phase where your brain's still vulnerable, but like you don't necessarily have symptoms. And that's that gray area where people get in trouble because they think they're good. They don't have symptoms. They're like, okay, symptoms, go back to your brain's not ready for it.
Yeah. And that's when they get a double concussion, right? Go back into there too early. What do you, let's dive a little bit further into that. So after you get a concussion, what would be the steps to recovery? Let's say, for instance, you're a UFC fighter, you get your concussion. Obviously, they're going to give you a suspension. What's the steps? Do they go back and train, like drilling, or do they do any conditioning? I know there's some issues there with that, but what's your take on it?
All right, so right now, the protocol I use is I would say for the first 1 to 2 days, you just kind of rest, right? But then you want to do some kind of activity, start getting your blood pumping. What I would do in a perfect situation is on that 3rd or 4th day, I would get someone on a treadmill and I would just get their heart rate up as high as it goes until they get symptoms. And then we know that that's their marker. It's a test called the Buffalo treadmill test.
Okay.
So like, let's say you're doing something, you get your heart rate up to like 150 and then you start getting those symptoms, right? Because again, your brain's in this energy deficit. It can't really handle when your blood pressure goes, or your blood goes higher than that. So then I would have them start doing like light aerobic training under that. So like you could do like 80% of, 80% of 150, whatever it was, you train that for a week or so, then you go up to 90, then maybe you retest. Let's say you don't have that luxury of taking the test. I would say, you'd start with like a 70% max heart rate. And then if there's symptoms, you'd go under that. Okay. Before I let any progress any step, they have to make sure that they go through whatever activity we did. Then they have to have no symptoms for 24 hours. Because, I mean, this is pretty common with even musculoskeletal issues, where people feel good at the time, and then, like, later in the day, they push themselves too hard. Yeah. So after you go through that aerobic, that initial aerobic thing, then I would say, okay, well, now let's try above 70%. So now you're kind of pushing into that, over that lactic threshold, likely. This is also where, assuming they do okay with that, the next step would be some moderate resistance training. So, because the thing is, there's nothing about weight training that's going to make it worse other than your heart rate goes higher. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So once you do that, then the next step would be some sport-specific skills. And this, as a clinician, is kind of where you kind of need to know the sport. So first thing I'd have someone do would be some light, we'll say striking, some like light striking drills, whether it's with a pad holder or a bag. But also you kind of have to know the fighter, because some fighters on the bag, they're going to go really hard, really fast. They're going to be moving around a lot. Mm-hmm. For most cases, I would say bag first, where you're just kind of getting comfortable. Some people, I actually might say use a pad holder first, like make sure the pad holder is stationary. They're not moving around, because the pad holder can kind of control the tempo a little bit. So it kind of depends on the person. Then the next step is I would either add one or the other. If you're with a pad holder, maybe you add a little bit more movement. So now you're actually adding some steps. You're moving the mid around, so they actually have to use some visual tracking. Increase the intensity. At this point, you can maybe shadow box with motion. So now you're actually moving around, moving different positions, so your head's going away. Then maybe I would say depending on the person, if I trust them, doing some light drilling. I'd probably start drilling wise, start jujitsu. Wrestling, I'd wait a little bit just because there's just more chance of stuff happening. Assuming they go through all of these steps and every time they have no symptoms for 24 hours, I'd progress them. That's what I'd consider some contact training. Before I did any contact, though, I have to make sure that they have no symptoms, that if I have the luxury of doing like neurocognitive testing, like impact, that they're back to a base. If I have a baseline, they have no baseline. They're back to their baseline. They have no other issues with like headaches and stuff like that. That's when I kind of clear them for contact. So, and that's kind of where it's tricky as a clinician, because symptoms end by that 7 to 10 day mark, but that weakened state can be up for about 30 days. So that's like that 20-day mark where you feel good, but you're not good. That's where I would, as a clinician, I'd be working with my strength coaches where I say, hey, you can do this. I'm lucky where if I needed to, like I could hold pads for someone and say, hey, do this with me with your trainer, or do this with, on the bag. Not everyone's going to be able to do that, and I would want to do some kind of testing to know that they're 100% before just say, hey, go back, because I'm sure chances are what happened with you is you probably just went back too soon, and then that's what made your concussions worse.
If you are a fighter or someone who wants to start training in MMA, listen up. My name is Daru. I am the head performance coach of American Top Team. I train some of the elite MMA athletes in the world, such as Dustin Poirier, King Mo Lawal, Frankie Edgar, Junior Dos Santos, Edson Barboza, and Joanna Jedrzejczyk. Going to MMA gyms or hiring a personal trainer can get extremely expensive over time. So if you want to get in shape and train using the exact program of the top MMA fighters for an affordable one-time price, check out Fight Ready in the description below.